Yeah, it's 11 o'clock. Good morning. It's Sunday morning, June 14th, 2020. Are you well? It's a lovely morning in Salford here in the northwest of the UK. Hope your weekend is going well so far. I am Richie Allen. You can tweet this programme between now and midday. It's at Richie Allen Show on Twitter. I look forward to hearing your tweets, or reading your tweets even. That makes more sense as we go along. Lots to talk about today. Welcome to Sunday View.
It's the BBG, not the BBC. You're listening to the Richie Allen Radio Show, live from Salford in Greater Manchester.
It's the Richie Allen Show, broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Yeah, we've been here before, me and thee, so I'm going to look through the newspapers and we'll hear from the BBC and Sky News mid-morning talk shows as well. That's what Sunday View is, and reading your tweets and all the rest of it. So let's just get on with it then, I suppose. Yeah, lovely day yesterday. Gorgeous weather yesterday. Some of it today maybe. Little bit of rain around the northwest this afternoon. So hoping it'll be a nice afternoon today. It is the 14th of June. Although days tend to bleed into one another, don't they, during the lockdown. I posted a tweet about gaslighting yesterday. And it was an aside, really. Just one of those things. No big deal. I don't often, utter. You won't get too many utterances of the profound from yours truly. But I kind of connected with people. And I got up this morning to find that I had dozens of emails from people emailing the Gmail account, the Richie Allen Show Gmail account, from people saying that they kind of understood, finally, what I've been banging on about for years. The raison d'etre for the media. Gaslighting. That's a term that's only recently, I suppose, entered our daily parlance. The lexicon. Gaslighting, beating you down. That's what the media does, beats you down. Think of a bad parent. A parent that tells a child constantly that the child is stupid or useless or bad or wrong. It changes the child, obviously, without, that goes without saying, right? And we spend more time with the television. And your entertainment shows these days are programming us in the same way as 24-hour news channels are programming us in terms of telling us what we should be thinking about things and how bad and how bigoted and how stupid and how outside we are if we're not on the right side. And that's what's basically been happening to us. We're told every other day that we're racist, we're hateful, we're told we are selfish, we're told we're using the wrong language, we're destroying the planet, we're privileged. And if we're not that, well, we're homophobic or we are transphobic or we are gammon. Guilty as charged. We are backwards. We are germ spreaders and we're a threat to one another. So it's everywhere. And I might think it's very simplistic. It isn't simplistic. How it actually operates is pretty sophisticated. But when you look at it, when you can see it in front of you, it becomes fairly simple. Worthless. We're basically told we're worthless on a daily basis. And after a while, you believe it. And I think it's more noticeable in the young because they're a little bit more susceptible. It's not because the young are stupid or any less intellectually capable than we are. Far from it. But they spend more time looking at screens. And I tweeted this out yesterday and it meant a lot to people. Been getting emails from people that never heard of the programme to say to me, yeah, I'm understanding that. What you mean by it? And I say, well, look, I've been through and around every aspect of the media, commercial, national and independent. So I see what's happening. Right, okay. Let's move on. Big story in Atlanta over the weekend, Atlanta, Georgia. A man called Richard Brooks was asleep in his car at a drive-through. Apparently, he was awakened by the police and he failed a breathalyzer test. That's apparently. I don't know if that's been determined and if it has been accepted as a fact. But he did struggle with the police. He did break away and he managed, while running away, to take a taser from one of the officers, and he turned while he was fleeing and attempted to discharge the taser, and at that point he was shot dead, and it's resulted in the police chief there and the mayor resigning. And I don't know anything else about that. It is being covered on Sky News and the BBC. It's obviously totally unnecessary. Why does it escalate? If a guy is pissed up and he is not in control of a vehicle, and of course you shouldn't be drunken in a car, that's a whole separate issue. You've got to deal with that. Why frequently do interactions between the police and American citizens, disproportionately black, no doubt, why do they end up in people getting shot? The very easy answer, the race-baiting answer, is to say racism. But it's far more complicated than that, as we know. Reference my interview last week with a gentleman whom, as far as many of the hats, I'm speaking about Garland Nixon, of the many hats he wore, he was a police force instructor for years. Garland Nixon, this black gentleman. It's far too simplistic to say racism. But it's another example of where a guy hasn't killed anybody, hasn't raped anybody, isn't a violent criminal, has a confrontation with the police, and he ends up dead. And I'm not going to say any more about that this Sunday, because I don't know anything about it. Front pages of the UK newspapers, let's have a look. Sunday Mirror, shameful is the headline. Thugs clash with police near Cenotaph in Whitehall. You will have seen this on the news yesterday. A photograph of protesters clashing with police on the front page of many papers. Sunday Mirror leading with that, saying it's shameful and that a far-right mob basically hijacked a demonstration. Certain right-wing spokespeople have said they were in London to protect war memorials, the Cenotaph, and statues of interest, Churchill and all the rest of it. But they boarded up Churchill's statue ahead of the weekend anyway. The Sunday Telegraph, 10 years in jail for protesters who desecrate war memorials. So the Telegraph carries a picture of police in riot gear and reports that ministers are thinking about plans to make it easier to prosecute people who vandalise war memorials, and giving potential prison sentences of up to 10 years. The Mail on Sunday will rip through these. Also got pictures of the violence on the Mail on Sunday. But the lead story is COVID. Now we'll talk about this a bit later on. PM takes charge on 2 meters is the headline on the Mail on Sunday. It's the 2 meter social distancing rule. We know that millions of jobs are at risk in the hospitality sector if things don't change very quickly. And the 2 meter rule, if it is enforced in pubs and restaurants and clubs and nightclubs and discotheques and all the rest of it, well, it's pretty much unenforceable, isn't it? And it will mean that these venues won't be able to open. Or at least if they do, at a much reduced capacity. So they'll be hemorrhaging money. So there is talk of reducing the 2 meter distance to 1 meter. And we'll hear more about that soon. The Sunday Express, the headline is "Stay safe, but hit the high street." The Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, will hear from him momentarily. He's been telling us all to get out and shop. Get out and shop, you tight bastards. Get your wallets out and your purses and your handbags and get back out now as we open the shops tomorrow. The only thing is, of course, the shopping experience has been transformed so utterly and completely that it mightn't be too pleasant now, let me tell you, to be going down Market Street in Manchester tomorrow. Be like something, I don't know what it'll be like. I can't draw an appropriate analogy. But you'll have people serving you. They'll sound like Darth Vader, behind visors and masks, with gloves on them, doing everything they can to avoid physical contact. It's going to be crazy. You'll hear from Sunak in a minute. So stay safe, but hit the High Street Sunday Express. Sunday people, tell us truth on Corona care homes. This is important. This is important. The Sunday People says 800 families whose relatives have died with coronavirus in care homes have called for a public inquiry. Human rights lawyer Leanne Devine, who's been representing families in Liverpool over the years following the Hillsborough disaster. She's been telling the Sunday People that she's been contacted by hundreds of families who want the truth. Coronavirus and care homes. People being chucked out of hospitals with symptoms of a respiratory illness back in February and March. Older people to make way, to clear up beds for the pandemic. They were sent into care homes and it was disastrous, we're being told. And the families are saying, what happened? Who made that decision? We want an inquiry. The Observer, children's czar, Prime Minister is risking basic right to an education. Again, this is about the attempts to get children back to school, but schools are being told classrooms have to have 15 pupils or less. Again, the social distancing, it's absolutely crazy. And a very important and very interesting story in the Sunday Times, PM scraps plan to make gender change easier. So Theresa May, Teresa you're supposed to say, Theresa May, when she was Prime Minister, she developed plans to make it easy for transgender people to change their birth certificates without any medical diagnosis. And of course, trans activists were thrilled about this. Oh, they were delighted. But Boris Johnson, his government, is looking at, well, let's scrap those plans. So the trans activists won't be too happy at all. I don't mind telling you. This is Sunday View with me, Richie Allen. The time is 12 minutes past 11. And because it's a more laid-back show than the Richie Allen Radio Show, Monday to Thursday, let's have a tune from Sam and Dave. Let's have a tune, I tell you. Welcome to Sunday View from Salford, very close to Media City. I'm Richie Allen. Good morning. Yeah, Sam and Dave on the Richie Allen Show, Sunday View for Sunday morning, the 14th of June. It is the BBG, not the BBC. Like I said, literally a stone's throw from Media City in Salford. Kind of ironic that, really. Good morning to Bristol Being, who says in a boot store in Cheltenham, if you want to use the lift with more than one person in it, you all have to turn and face the walls till you get off. That's interesting because the advice is for supermarkets, the advice is that it should only be one person in the lift unless it's your immediate family. Good morning to Liz, who says, Richie, the problem about toilets for trans people, it's a non-issue. Now no one else can use public toilets, says Liz. Good morning to Snuff Said In It. Richie, are you awake yet? Guess you are, that's why you're here. Yes, all right, okay. I'm not sure I get that. Good morning to Bass Ninja. How you doing, Bass Ninja? Good morning to Sophie. Good morning to Carl. How you doing, Carl? First time listener. All right, Carl. Welcome to the programme. Good morning to Tommy. Good morning to Paul Powernight, to Susan, and to A Rose. Yes. Hi to Matt in Kingston. How you doing, Matt? Good morning. He's tweeted something from Simon Dolan. I will read that a bit later on. Let's move on because there's so much to get through. There's an enormous amount that we need to talk about this morning. Let's get through it. So why did you play the music then, Baldy? Well, it's a Sunday. Peter Hitchens writes in the Mail on Sunday. He's been invited on this programme. He doesn't want to come on. That's okay. I don't want to come on most days. I understand, but I do anyway. Hitchens, in a very good piece on what's been happening in London and the virus, but I'm going to read just a smidgen of it for you about the virus. Peter Hitchens. This can be read for free, gratis, dailymail.co.uk. I know it's the Mail. I know the Daily Fail. I've categorised or characterised the Mail as being a bit schizo. It's a schizophrenic newspaper. You'll get a bit of race baiting and all of that, and a bit of nonsense, and a bit of pro-conservative government propaganda. But alongside it, you'll get some bloody good journalism as well. You know. Hitchens writes, and now we have the dictatorship of fear. It is not the largely fictional R number which governs the behaviour of our feeble government, which is only just beginning to grasp how much damage it has done and how hard it will be to repair. It is the F number, the number of people scared into pathetic timidity by the slick but false claim we were all at risk from a terrible and devastating disease. The numbers of dead are grossly inflated by an incredibly lax recording system, which does not distinguish between those who died of COVID-19 and those who died of other things but may have been infected by it. Many who have died of COVID-19 are almost certainly victims of the government's failure to protect those who were in fact most vulnerable, the residents of care homes. The sad but unavoidable fact that the disease is little danger to most young and healthy people, but is especially deadly to the old and ill, is also now beyond dispute. The initial claims of Imperial College London that 500,000 might die if strict shutdown measures were not taken have been devastatingly dismantled by other experts who believe its methods and codes are, to put it mildly, hopelessly wrong. Yet Imperial's chief spokesman, Professor Neil Ferguson, and he goes on to talk about Ferguson. Then he says, by contrast, Sunetra Gupta, Professor of Theoretical Epidemiology at the University of Oxford, she says that the shutdown should be lifted immediately. Thanks to the barefaced dishonesty and unlawful bias of the BBC, and also the pitifully bad coverage of several newspapers, millions are unaware that the whole basis of government policy is now completely exploded by scientific experts. Now, in his piece today, Hitchens mentioned, you heard it there, Sunetra Gupta, Professor of Theoretical Epidemiology at the University of Oxford. She was on BBC Radio 4 on Thursday last. Doesn't do too many interviews. And she was asked about herd immunity. And was that the way forward? Listen carefully. Professor of Theoretical Epidemiology at the University of Oxford, Sunetra Gupta on BBC Radio 4.
Yes, I think I would have said that, but on the proviso that we put as much money as possible, and to make up for what hasn't happened over the last 30 years, to support the vulnerable sectors of the population. So I would have said yes. I think at that point we had enough information to know that there were certain sectors of the population who were particularly vulnerable and that we needed to protect them and to reduce their risk. And the way to reduce the risk to the vulnerable population, as we have done with unwittingly in some cases with the pathogens that do kill elderly people and others who are vulnerable, is by having enough immunity ourselves such that the risk posed to the vulnerable populations is low.
So what the idea that the rest of the population carry on as normal, try possibly to get the virus so that they can be the people who represent the herd immunity?
I mean, that's how we've traditionally dealt with the pathogens that do at the moment kill the elderly and the vulnerable. I mean, you need to balance out that problem against the problem of completely shutting down the economy or our social, or compromising our social interactions to the point where to the point of farce, let's face it.
So what, has the lockdown been a farce?
We're trying to wriggle out of this situation in a way that is, I think, quite farcical. We come up with rules that are arbitrary, to my mind. What I don't understand about lockdown is, what is the exit strategy from it anyway?
Would you just lift it as quickly as possible?
Yes, right now, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, she talked about arbitrary measures or rules, keep those vulnerable to pathogens safe, she said, and let everybody else become exposed to it. That's how it worked for many years. You would get immunity in the community, or herd immunity, as we know it now. And what Peter Hitchens has been saying in the Mail on Sunday, and he has been saying for weeks, but some of us have been saying for years, this is how the media operates. It has been decided. Where and by whom, I don't know. That the virus is deadly and the lockdown is necessary to keep us all safe. And what the media has done is it's gone along with that, and it has largely acted as a gatekeeper or a barrier to those in medicine and science who disagree. And like I'm blue in the face saying, many of these men and women like Sunetra Gupta, their credentials and qualifications are the equal of those being championed by the BBC as the experts. Because you'll hear presenters saying this all the time. It's a stock phrase now for television and radio presenters. Experts are saying. It's rotten journalism, because the listener or the viewer is well within their rights to say, which experts are you talking about now? Neil Ferguson? Was Neil Ferguson ever right about anything in his life? What about these other experts, Carl Hennigan, Vernon Coleman, who was on this programme, right? We could be here all day long. And of course, Sunetra Gupta. So she's right. Now, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, was sent out to bat this morning. He's very excited because tomorrow non-essential businesses can reopen, providing they can put in their social distancing measures, one-way systems, screens to protect staff, contactless payments, quarantines for the shoes. This gives us belly laughs, doesn't it? Quarantine for the shoes. Your woman in front of you tries on a pair of shoes. Well, that's you effect if there's only one pair to try on, because the shoes will then be gathered up at the speed of light, transported to a back room, sprayed with something, and then isolated for 24 hours. Separate entrances and exits, and little hand sanitising stations all around the shop as well. Sounds wonderful. I can't wait to get downtown tomorrow. Anyway, Rishi Sunak on Sophie Ridge this morning. What did he think of the disgraceful scenes of the hooligans fighting the police and urinating on memorials yesterday? Does he agree with Boris Johnson that it was sheer thuggery and has to be dealt with in the most severe fashion? Here he is, the Chancellor.
I would agree with him. I think the scenes we saw yesterday were both shocking and disgusting. This has always been an open and tolerant country, and what we saw yesterday was not that. And I fully support the police in taking the action that they did. It's sad that they had to, and I would urge everyone to remember that at a time when we're facing a pandemic in this country, to be mindful of that and to act responsibly.
Now, you spoke to our economics editor, Ed Conway, a bit earlier this week, and you said that racism stings in a way that very few other things have. But the things that might have happened many years ago when I was a kid, I think are things that would not happen to me today. I just wonder, when you saw the actions of some, not all, but some of the people out yesterday, clashing with police, Nazi salutes, are you still confident that some of the things you might have experienced as a child wouldn't happen today?
Of course, there will always be a small minority who maintain prejudice and indeed are racist, but that is not overall a description I would ascribe to our country. And the point I was making to Ed, and I'd reiterate, is I think there's been enormous progress that our country and our society has made. If I think back to the time when my grandparents first arrived, when I was growing up, yes, I do think things have changed enormously for the better because of how we've all evolved as a society. That doesn't mean a small minority still hold beliefs that I find abhorrent, and all of us collectively share that. And I think what was interesting is that the country was united in condemning what they saw yesterday, and that just shows the progress that we've made.
Right, the Chancellor. Basically, it's a minority, right? It's a minority. You'll always have them. They've always been here and they always will. These goons, these skinheads, these football hooligans, and of course they're not even representative. These clowns of football fans. All you can do is wait for any of them to break any existing law and arrest and charge them. But you can't change the way they think. Not forcibly anyhow. Okay? So 10-year prison terms for damaging war memorials. What does Rishi Sunak think of that?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the most distressing things to see yesterday was that. And I know many people, certainly MPs, have raised this issue, and the Justice Secretary will be meeting with all those MPs, I believe, this week to discuss these matters further. But that was absolutely shocking scenes to see yesterday.
OK, now I'm keen to talk about the economy as well, because the situation really is unprecedented, genuinely unprecedented. Figures out this week showing our economy shrank by a quarter in March and April. That's 18 years of growth just wiped out in 2 months. Now, when we last spoke, which feels like a long time ago, back in March, you said that coronavirus is going to have an impact, but it will be an impact for a temporary period of time. I mean, that now feels quite optimistic. There's been talk of up to 3.5 million job losses if the economy isn't restarted soon. We could be dealing with the fallout of this crisis for the rest of our lives, couldn't we?
Well, I'm more optimistic than that, but I think you're right. The numbers we saw this week just lay bare the scale of the economic impact that this lockdown has had on our economy over the past few months. We've always known that was going to happen, but now the numbers are starting to show that. And these aren't just numbers, these are people's lives. We're seeing many people are losing their jobs and will lose their jobs as a result of what has happened. That's families without the security that they have come to depend on. That weighs very heavily on my shoulders. But I think we have a plan going forward. We've put in place. The first step of that plan was, as you remember when we spoke, was to put in place an enormous amount of support to help companies, to help businesses, to help individuals and their families through this crisis, to help bridge through it, the immediate impact of which is temporary. But then the next stages of our plan will ensure that we can help drive the recovery, starting with tomorrow and our shops reopening again, which is a very positive step. And then we need to move on to the hospitality sectors as well, sectors that employ millions of people, and then also help all of those who have lost their jobs as a result of this, help them get back into work as well. So those are all the next stages of our plan.
Yeah, but there won't be any jobs for them. And neither Sophie Ridge nor the BBC's Andrew Marr, who interviewed Sunak a little bit later, would broach the subject of how the billions you've borrowed to support the furlough scheme, how will those billions be paid back? Keep that in mind. None of them wanted to go there with the Chancellor today. So tomorrow the shops are opening. There have been calls to reduce the distance we should leave between each other to 1 metre, which would help shops and later on would help pubs and restaurants in July. I mean, this is laughable, this. Vernon Coleman told me, and he was right, now I didn't look it up, but he did tell me that a cough or a sneeze travels 26 feet, was it, or 26 metres? 26 feet, right? 26 feet. I mean, this is laughable. The 2 metre thing was a nonsense from the get-go, right? Anyway, Sunak has asked about the proposal to reduce 2 metres to 1 metre. What did he say?
Yeah, the Prime Minister has put in place a comprehensive review of the 2 metre rule. It's always said we keep everything under review, all the guidance, as we evolve through this crisis to see what we're able to look at. That review will involve the scientists, economists and others, so we can look at it in the round. You're absolutely right to highlight the impact it has on business. I know that, of course. It's a difference between 3/4 and maybe 1/3 of pubs opening, for example. So it's important that we look at it. Now that we have made good progress in suppressing the virus, we're at a different stage of this epidemic than we were at the beginning, and that enables us to take a fresh look at this. Obviously, many other countries around the world use a different rule, and indeed, we've seen a couple of countries recently, I think Norway and Denmark from memory, have moved from 2 metres to something less as well. But it's important that we look at it comprehensively in the round, and that's what we will do urgently.
Rishi Sunak, before I read some of your tweets again, I'll come back to your tweets. I told you that about a half an hour later, he was in a BBC studio with Andrew Marr. And this is what kills me about the media in 2020 or in 2018 or in 2010. It kills me, right? Marr, as I mentioned, does not ask about repaying the money and the crippling depression to come. They talk about racism and then they come to the 1 metre change. And Andrew Marr, the BBC presenter, helpfully suggests this to the Chancellor.
It's a very, very hard judgment call. I understand that lots of people watching will be wondering about whether to go out and all the rest of it. You could strike, as it were, a deal with the science side and say in return for relaxing the rule, you insist that virtually everybody wears face coverings when they're shopping or out in the street.
Oh, my God.
What kind of fuckery is this?
That's the calibre of journalism in 2020. Rather than challenge any of Rishak's nonsense, Rishi Sunak's nonsense, easy for me to say, rather than look at Sunak and challenge it and say, why don't you just scrap this ridiculous lockdown once and for all? Marr very helpfully says, well, do a deal with the scientists, tell them that if they agree that it's okay to reduce the distance to 1 metre, you'll introduce mandatory face coverings for everybody when they're out at all times. Wonderful. And his response, the Chancellor?
Well, look, Andrew, that a fair point, and that's exactly, we will discuss all these things as part of this review. And
I'm sure you will be discussing these things to get people out. I mean, ultimately where they're going with this is that you won't be able to go outside without a mask. That's where they want to go, right?
You've seen on face coverings, for example, we have made some changes in that direction. For example, on public transport, for example, imminently about to change. So I think all of that's the kind of thing that we will discuss. But can I just go back to one point you said about people having the confidence to go out and knowing it's safe? Yes, I mean,
the ONS say 36% of people in England are still too scared to leave their houses. So my question was going to be, how do you expect them to go shopping?
If the Office for National Statistics is right, and that 36% of people in the UK are genuinely scared about leaving their houses, I mean, this has been an enormous success for those behind it, for the people behind it, right? Petrified. I had an incident the other morning in the park. I didn't want to bring it up because I wasn't very kind to a gentleman. I'm not very proud of myself. It was very, very early Wednesday morning, I think. Like just after 5:45 in the morning. And my retriever, our retriever, Leia, who's 7 months old and is a bundle of joy and beauty and happiness and love, ran towards a guy who had a dog with him. And I've seen the guy before. And I'm trying to train the little one not to jump up on people, which really it's a fool's errand, right? I mean, how stupid am I to be telling a golden retriever at 7 months old not to jump on top of people? It's a waste of time. They do it anyway, right? And there are laws against using shock collars and cattle prods on dogs, god damn it. So I can't do that. I've just got to keep shouting at her, right? Right. Anyway, Wednesday morning, I go to get the dog off of the guy. I say good morning to him. And the guy jumps back away from me as if I'm, I don't know, a poisonous snake. And I said, what's going on? What's up with you? He said, keep your distance, keep your distance. Keep your 2 meters. And I'm not going to say what I said, but I was very unkind. I'm not surprised to hear that 36% of people surveyed for the ONS are saying, oh, we won't go out. The programming has been wonderfully successful, hasn't it?
Shopping. Well, this is incredibly important, and I understand that anxiety. For the last 3 months, we've all been sitting at home.
I understand the anxiety because it was us that put the fear of God in you to begin with.
Been worried about going out, and I think it's important now that people do have that confidence to go out, especially as we start to reopen.
Now that we need you to start shopping again, forget everything we told you in the last 3 months.
And these parts of our economy.
Piss off, you know? Let's move on. 25 minutes to midday Sunday. Richie Allen Radio Show, Sunday View. All right. I tell you, I'm going to read your tweets, right? I tell you, your tweets will be read. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds. Stay with me, please.
Renowned healer Mark Bayersky travels the world to find the most unique and powerful crystals for self-healing. Since the ancient times, crystals have been used as healing tools. They hold a natural healing vibration and are highly charged in positive energy. Mark teaches how to channel the universal energy and transfer it to the crystal to activate its healing power. Each crystal is used for its unique ability to target a different physical or emotional challenge. Mark Bayersky is an author, healer, speaker, and founder of the Pure Energy Healing Academy. He shares powerful messages of inspiration and healing on his daily YouTube videos, reaching millions worldwide. Mark's crystals, healing oils, and incense sticks are most sought after by other healers. His collection is available online at www.markbayersky.com. His work is presented through Lemon House, a company that creates and curates consciously made gifts.
This is the Richie Allen Show, the most listened to independent news radio show in Europe.
Yes. Has anybody experienced any streaming issues this morning? I know we've got an ongoing problem with Google Chrome. Let me know. I've had a look at the streaming server and we've got a very healthy listenership listening live around the world at the moment. So it seems that it's okay, but I understand that one or two people. I've been, Jean Ann's been in touch with me from Cleggan on the west coast of God's country. And there's been one or two problems. So just let me know. There has been one or two problems with Google Chrome. I know this. And it's being worked on. Brand new website for the Richie Allen Radio Show coming real soon. Hi to Polly. I posted a photograph that I stole from the Daily Mail, or the Mail on Sunday. I robbed it, so I did. It's a photograph of a playground, of a teacher wearing a white coat and a mask, and children being separated into play zones with red tape around the playground. And it's left a number of you aghast. And well, it should leave you aghast. Children are not affected by this thing, you know. Not getting into that again. We've talked about it. Charlotte says, I think the 36% may well be children. Some children are absolutely traumatised by this. I have no doubt, because we are surrounded by people with young children, and we talk to them, to the parents. Chat away to them, friendly chat like good neighbours should do. And I've been told by one or two parents the children are petrified. Of course. Good morning to David. You tweeted me an interesting tweet, David. I'm going to find it in a moment. Stuart tweets, what a bunch of liars. Isn't it time to boot these criminals out and defund the BBC as well? How do people sit through this and believe any of it? It is super mind control, says Stuart. Hi to William Andrews, who says, Richie, the parents do nothing, just watch and complain. Then back to the television to watch the soaps again. Sad, gutless people, says William. William, don't be so hard on them. These are our friends and neighbours. You know, this is very strong propaganda. And it works on some very intellectual minds, very intelligent people. There are people, William, who buy this stuff, whom, well, when you want to do an intelligence quotient test, these people would leave me standing. And yet they buy it, they swallow it, they regurgitate it, and they look at you like you've got 15 heads when you offer them an alternative perspective. So the propaganda and the programming is very strong. So I used to be like that, you know, blame people. But then I think it's arrogant anyway to be like that, to assume that you know everything. You know? Hi to Wayne, who tweets, Richie, when shops reopen, fitting rooms will be closed. You won't be able to try anything on. You may as well order them online, says Wayne. That's well noticed, Wayne. Hi to Susan, who's tweeting about Primark. I'll have a look at that, Susan, when I get a chance. Thank you very much. David tweets, listen to this. I've already experienced the consequences of the inaccessibility of drinking venues, Richie. My antisocial neighbours having all-night parties. I didn't get to sleep until 3:30 this morning thanks to loud, drunken twats, he says. Well, this is the century of the self, David. This is the century of the self. For anybody who hasn't seen them, download Adam Curtis' 3 films, the trilogy for the BBC, The Century of the Self, Selfish Individualism. We are in a place, and I know we keep painting this horrible picture of our lives, but sadly, that's what's going on. That's what's going on. This is what people have become. It's what they have been programmed to become. Completely not interested in how what they do impacts on anybody else. It used to be totally different. We were brought up like that. My mother, who loved loud music, the louder the better, just like me. I like it loud because I'm deaf. Decades of wearing cans on my ears, doing radio and whatnot. She loved a bit of live music. Once you got to a certain time of the early evening, though, turn it off. Why? Because the people next door shouldn't have to put up with it. Yes. My music goes off at about 8:30, 9 o'clock of a weekend evening. Or I turn it right down so that I can barely hear it. And I ask my neighbours, listen, do you hear my music? Not really. Don't mind, Richie. And it goes off early enough, so don't worry about it. Well, people are not like that anymore, David. Of course not. The century of the self, selfish individualism reigns. I don't care. Whether people like hearing it or not, it's the truth. The Bishop of Dover is a black woman called Rose Hudson Wilkin. She was on Sky News this morning because yesterday she was in London and she took the megaphone from a group of protesters and she said racism is a pandemic. The Bishop of Dover, Rose Hudson Wilkin. Sophie Ridge on Sky News asks her, in her opinion, does she think that the UK is a racist country? What does the Bishop say?
Do you know, I would be lying if I did not say that racism exists in this country as it exists in other countries too. This is not a UK thing. This is not an America thing. This is a world thing. People who are Black have been experiencing this kind of injustice for such a long time. And it is about time now, as we move into this century, for us all to say that this is unacceptable. This is what is unacceptable. And we must no longer collude with our silence or pretend it doesn't matter to me. I'm all right, Jack. We are not all right if one part of humanity is not okay.
Is there anything specifically that you would like to see happen as a result of the protests that we've seen?
Yes, what I want to see is the kind of social transformation, breaking down structural racism. I want every institution to look at itself. I want them to ask questions like, why have we not got people of all different backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, in leadership within these institutions? You see, for too long, we have been content in our organizations, in our institutions, and taken it for granted that Black people, we can do the cleaning, we can do the work in the kitchen, but we cannot sit at the table. For too long, we have looked at Black people and said, actually, they don't have leadership qualities. No, enough is enough. We are just as good as anyone else.
Yeah, but who's saying that you aren't, Bishop? And of course, again, we're back to the media. Completely impotent media. None of these presenters like Sophie Ridge dares to ask the Bishop. Be specific. You keep telling us how oppressed and how downtrodden you are. Give me some examples. I mean, Jesus, this is basic journalism 101. I'm spoiling you. Do you know that? This is where I get a little bit arrogant now. And a little bit boastful, maybe. You're fucking spoiled when you listen to this programme. I mean, I must be the last one standing that actually asks people questions. That says, well, how do you know that? Or give me some evidence. Or give me an example. All you have to do is say to the... I mean, she might have an example. Where's the evidence, love? I don't mean to be derogatory or condescending by saying love. I don't mean to be. Where's the evidence? This nonsense. We are not going to be the cleaners anymore. You're not the fucking cleaners. Every time I turn on the television, I see a Black presenter. Happy days. And I don't care. Take the test. Take the Pepsi challenge. Turn your television on at midday. Start scrolling around it. You'll find Black presenters everywhere. Astonishing, really, when Black men and women make up about 3% of the population here. And that's just in entertainment. So I'd love one of these presenters to just stop the virtue signalling. If you listen back to that interview on Ridge today, on 2 occasions, Ridge congratulated her on her beautiful message. Oh, that's a beautiful emotional message, Bishop. Well, it isn't. It's bullshit is what it is. Give me some examples. And don't just roll out the blacks are more likely to be stopped than whites, because that is true. That is true. And something has to be done about that. It must be looked at. But everywhere else, I don't see blacks having it too hard. And I don't care whom that offends. Piss off. Go away. Cry me a river, you know? We're not going to be the ones in the kitchen anymore, or in the toilets, or on the undergrounds. Well, you fucking will be. Whether you like it or not. Like everybody else. There won't be any jobs in a few years' time. There'll be nothing for anybody. Millions of people are furloughed at the moment because of this COVID hoax. They're going to find out in a few weeks' time they've no job to go to. And worse than that, there's no other job to go to. There's not some other industry you can, migrate your talents to. This is deliberate, this. I'm tired of saying it. I wrote a semi-silly rant on Facebook yesterday. And I don't use Facebook. I've no time for that. I deleted my personal page nearly 3 years ago. I used it because I can't upload articles to my website yet because it's been revamped and changed by the great Hayden Hewitt. Otherwise I would have done it. I put a semi-serious rant on there, semi-silly I should say. Jesus Christ, arguing over, oh, we don't have this and we don't have that, and 5G is here, geoengineering is here. Food, GM foods are here. Mandatory vaccines are coming. A social crediting system is coming. For who? For the blacks? For the Jews? For the Oriental people? Maybe for the Muslims? No, for every human being on planet Earth. It's Lockdown 2000. So cry me a river about, slavery and white privilege and we're not going to be oppressed anymore and we're standing up. I'll tell you what you can do. You can fuck off is what you can do. That's what you can do. And there's a few of us in the independent media. We'll talk about that which matters. The agendas which I've just described a few seconds ago. The agendas which I wrote about on Facebook yesterday. So you go and have your race wars and your culture wars. Measure, I'm not going to say it. Measure your penises and say, who's got it harder? Well, it's us. We're the victims. Well, I said this last week. I'm not going to do it again. This is where it is. Christ almighty. Right? So the Shadow Justice Secretary David Lammy was on the Marr Show, BBC One. Must be mentioned, today is the 3rd anniversary of the Grenfell fire. When that happened, we talked quite a bit about it. And gentrification. And the madness of stay indoors and all of that. Right? So, sad day for people whose friends and family were killed in that fire. Totally unnecessary. 3 years today. Anyway, Lammy was asked about the 10 years for vandals who desecrate war memorials.
Circumstances.
Well, the scenes were ugly and very, very threatening. And the scene involving urinating at PC Palmer's memorial was utterly, utterly despicable and must have hurt his family greatly. Fast track, yes, absolutely. Of course we want speedy justice. But I would say we have a massive backlog currently in our justice system because of coronavirus. And, of course, the virus is in prison. So how the government is going to do that, we'll certainly scrutinise.
There's a separate proposal for prison sentences for people who desecrate war memorials. Do you support that as well?
Well, it's already the case that you can get up to 10 years for criminal damage under the existing legislation. Whether we need a specific piece of legislation for memorials, of course we'll look at, but you can already get 10 years for in prison for criminal damage. Yeah, this is vaudeville. This is what the media is discussing, while all of those other agendas are real things. Right? And the Churchill statue? His statue should never have been attacked, and the idiots that did it deflect from the central message of Black Lives Matter. But is anyone seriously calling for Winston Churchill's statue to come down? I mean, I hope not. I mean, clearly, Winston Churchill stood in Parliament prior to the war. He was one of the only MPs speaking out against appeasement. He then, after Chamberlain resigned, became leader and led a coalition government that defeated fascism. And for all of those reasons, he's hugely respected. So I wouldn't support his statue coming down. But I recognise, of course, there's a debate about what he did in Bengal with the famine, what he did in the Tony Pandy riots. And I did a documentary for Channel 4 just a few months ago where I looked at his attitude to Africans that had contributed to the First World War, and he was found wanting. Many great figures in history are also flawed, and we ought to be able to have that debate as well.
Yeah. While Marr had David Lammy on, the Shadow Justice Secretary, Marr wanted to ask him about the front page of the Sunday Times. The story says, on the Times today, or in the Times, that plans to allow transgender people to change their birth certs without a medical diagnosis, those plans are going to be scrapped, much to the annoyance of certain militant trans activists. What does David Lammy, the Labour Party, say about that?
Picking up on a story, the front page story of the Sunday Times this morning, does the Labour Party support people being able to change their gender without medical identification, without medical checks?
Well, I mean, the legislation was passed a few years ago, and actually I was part of that legislation. There's now, I think, a change of view that people ought to be able to self-identify and not over-medicalised. We would have to look at the legislation when it comes forward in detail, obviously. I mean, it looks like we're some way off that.
Neatly sidestepped. This, of course, goes back to the J.K. Rowling row. Is it Rowling or Rowling? I don't know. I've never heard her pronounce her own name, so I don't know. Of course, where women, people who menstruate really pissed off J.K. Rowling. People who menstruate should be called women, right? Lammy didn't want to go there. And finally today then, and this is important, we're going to finish on something a little bit more important. The chase for a vaccine to make our world a safer place from pandemics and from the COVID-19 pandemic. Andrew Marr had Robin Shattock on from Imperial College, who's leading one particular team which is searching for a vaccine. Lots of searches, lots of teams around the world. How confident is Robin Shattock from Imperial College London that we will have a vaccine and we'll have one soon? What does he say?
Well, I think confidence is the wrong question. I think we have as good an opportunity as any other vaccine group to develop a vaccine, but predicting success is a foolish game because any individual vaccine has a high risk of failure. And what's important is that by having multiple vaccines around the world, we're pretty certain that we will get several that will be shown to work.
Now, your one is based on a new technology that hasn't been tested on humans before. In layman's terms, can you try to explain what's new about it?
Yeah, it's a really new approach. So normally vaccines are made by growing the virus and inactivating it or using other viruses to deliver it. We've gone through a much simpler approach. Essentially, we take the genetic material, only a small portion that encodes for the surface protein of the virus, and we make multiple copies of that and capture it in microscopic fat droplets. Now, when that's injected into the muscle, it's taken up by the cells, and that code, the instructions, are rapidly copied in those cells, and they actually become manufacturing sites for making multiple copies of that protein.
These people are so insane. They should be rolling around a padded room with a straitjacket on, with 15 straitjackets on, to prevent any possibility of escape. These people are batshit crazy, no pun intended. Listen to what he just described here.
We've gone through a much simpler approach. Essentially, we take the genetic material, only a small portion that encodes for the surface protein of the virus, and we make multiple copies of that and capture it in microscopic fat droplets. Now, when that's injected into the muscle, it's taken up by the cells, and that code, the instructions, are rapidly copied in those cells, and they actually become manufacturing sites for making multiple copies of that protein that alerts the immune system so that it makes protective antibodies. And the idea is that when you're then naturally exposed to the virus, you're already immune. The advantage that that gives us is we can make huge amounts of the vaccine because we use very tiny doses.
And is this something that could be relevant to all?
Marr hasn't a clue what he just heard there, so just swiftly move on there.
Relevant to all sorts of new diseases or pandemics of different kinds, not simply COVID-19 then?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what we're excited about the technology. It has a kind of plug-and-play approach. So today, coronavirus, tomorrow, avian flu. And we think if this technology works, whether it's used widely or not, by the time we get to the next pandemic, this will be the dominant approach because it is the technology of the future.
Dominant approach. Any more? He talks about Microsoft here, but not in the way you might think.
And obviously, as we've discussed, you have to do this at scale. The Oxford team are working with AstraZeneca. Are you convinced you can produce enough vaccine quickly enough if it works?
So we can certainly do that for the UK. We've already kind of put everything in place to be able to do that for the UK, and we hope that the government will act on, wanting to purchase that. And we're working with other partners around the world to do that. We have a very different model to AstraZeneca.
Wait till you hear his model. Wait till you hear his model. So imagine this crazy methodology that he's just described, that they managed to produce the vaccine. Wait till you hear the business model.
If you like, we want to be almost the Microsoft of the vaccine world, where...
We want to be the Microsoft of the vaccine world, right?
We make the genetic code, we pass that to other manufacturers and give them a sub-license.
Sub-license?
So that they can then use their hardware to manufacture the vaccine in different parts of the globe.
So we sub-license, kind of Microsoft approach that we have, our successful vaccine to other partners around the world so they can marry their hardware with it. Mad stuff, this, right?
It's obviously going to be a very big week for you ahead. But I'm really interested, at what point do you think you know that this is going to work?
Mar is wretched, isn't he? Because he's given Mar so many opportunities to jump in there and say, what? Licensing what now? So obviously there's a lot of money in it then. That's your question. Obviously, Mr. Shattuck or Professor Shattuck, there will be lots of money in it. Right. Now, isn't it true, sir? Isn't it true that you've got friends and colleagues who are directly influencing the UK government's decisions on vaccines and on medicines and on the distribution of same? And Shattuck would have said yes. And then Mark would say, well, then you've got a vested interest then, don't you? This is all a bit shabby and a bit shoddy and a bit murky, Andrew Marr should say to him. But of course he doesn't. Because he's presenting for the BBC. I'm going to love you and leave you. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. I'll be back with you tomorrow at 5 o'clock UK time for the first Richie Allen radio show of the week. Thanks for listening today. It looks like it'll be a nice afternoon here in the Northwest. Do get out and spend some time in the sun. It's bye from me.
I can hear her heart.